That's W-R-I-G-H-T. Homeless news and housing policy, the right way. Hello and welcome to the Wright Report Weekend Review. On the Weekend Review here at the Wright Report, we bring you weekly headline reports of homeless news and housing policy in the Denver metro area and some occasional national items as well. The Weekend Review consists of reading local headlines in my fancy announcer's voice, followed by a quick summary of its contents and perhaps a comment from your host. That's me, Benjamin Wright, W-R-I-G-H-T. In addition to the Weekend Review, we will be producing some in-depth reports on various news items as time and technology allow, and, well, whatever talent I got. To find other episodes, visit us on YouTube at The Wright Report. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you like the work we're doing here, consider joining our Patreon. We at the Wright Report want you to be better informed by reviewing news coverage of homelessness and housing policy, paying attention to how the coverage is framed, who framed it, hence the commentary, and with a little luck have some fun along the way. So let's get it right with the Wright Report. That's W-R-I-G-H-T. Okay, this week we're going to start off and end with the story of Joe Henry. And along the way, we're going to spend a lot of time with a whole bunch of shenanigans that went on at the state capitol with the special session for the property tax credit vote. Homeless handyman fired from Brown Palace for sleeping in hotel has lost hope for housing. Joe Henry thought he had a way out when he landed a gig at the Brown Palace, but bad luck and mistaken judgment led him back to the streets. For some Denver residents living on the streets, homelessness is a pitfall too deep to escape. Colorado, the rate of people returning to homelessness has increased each year since 2019, according to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. In 2022, the rate of people across the Denver metro area who returned to homelessness after 6 months off the street was 9%, up from 6% in 2019. And more than 20% had returned after 2 years off the street, more than any year since 2018. Lifelong Denver resident Joe Henry thought he had a way out of homelessness when he landed a gig at the Brown Palace. But bad luck and mistaken judgment led him back to square one. When Henry found his roommate dead in her room last October, he didn't know her death would lead him to homelessness and a life of sleeping in his car and empty spaces in out-of-order rooms at the Brown Palace Motel. More on Joe later. Colorado AG claims landlords are colluding to raise rents. What does that mean for Denver renters? This software might have set your rent. Are Colorado landlords agreeing to artificially raise rents? That's what the Colorado Attorney General Phil Weiser thinks. On Friday, his office joined a number of other states at the U.S. Justice Department in a lawsuit against RealPage Incorporated, a software company that uses confidential data from landlords to suggest rent prices. Thousands of Denver apartment units, maybe even yours, are owned by companies that use RealPage. So how does the price fixing work? In a normal economy, companies compete for customers by offering the best value for their prices. But collusion happens when companies come together and agree to all raise prices together, forcing consumers to pay more. It's illegal. In this case, landlords aren't meeting in a room and agreeing to raise rents. Instead, they submit their confidential vacancy and pricing data to RealPage individually, and the algorithm spits out suggested prices. That could be price fixing, Weiser alleges. Commentary. Could be price fixing. Could be price fixing. It absolutely is. That's the whole point. Is for RealPage to fix the prices as high as they possibly can.
Wise guy, huh?
Back to the article. He claims RealPage has pushed landlords to end lease perks, like rent discounts, and can use information about vacancies to help landlords strategically pull rentals off the market, driving up rents. Half of the renters in Colorado spend more than 30% of their income on housing costs, wrote Weiser in a statement Friday. Renters should benefit from healthy competition between landlords to find an apartment that fits their budget and needs. But RealPage's software and market dominance have enabled collusion between landlords to fix rents, set the number of apartments available in the market, and harm renters by forcing them to pay rents above competitive levels. Denver Wright has reached out to RealPage for comment. The company has generally defended its software as a way to help businesses make decisions. What does this mean for Denver renters? It's no secret that high rent levels are a problem in Denver. Affordability and housing are top issues for Denverites, and nonprofit leaders say that the high cost of rent is driving up homelessness. According to a June report from the corporate watchdog group Accountable US, the 6 largest publicly traded apartment companies have all faced lawsuits across the country over their use of RealPage. The report says that those 6 companies, Midwest America Apartments, Avalon Bay Communities, Equity Residential, Essex Property Trust, Camden Property Trust, and UDR, owned nearly 6,000 units in Denver as of March. Coincidentally, Accountable US says the landlord saw a combined $300 million in profits nationwide in the first quarter in 2024. And that's just the largest landlords. In April, Denver Wright reported on high rents and poor living conditions at an apartment complex at Inglewood owned by Bell Partners Incorporated, a company that has been sued by the Washington, D.C. Attorney General over claims of price fixing through RealPage. Does the lawsuit mean that rents will come down? It's unclear. Commentary. The words unclear is code for no. But he can't say that. Not just no, but hell no, let alone reparations for people that have been overcharged from these landlords. These people have been stolen from. Do you think that they're going to have the overcharging of their rents returned to them? Do you think anyone's actually going to go to jail? If there are no consequences for the people who are breaking the law in this way, they're just going to find other ways to do it. Let's continue. Weiser's lawsuit asks courts to end anti-competitive agreements with RealPage and its customers around sharing sensitive information. It also wants to end what Weiser calls an illegal monopoly over this type of software. Currently, the company owns about 80% of the market for this type of software, according to Weiser. Applications for the 135 Silverthorne workforce rental units anticipated to open in the fall. Let's get this down here. Silverthorne officials say the opportunity for residents to apply to one of the town's largest workforce housing efforts could be right around the corner. Based on community sentiment, this 135-unit workforce housing project has been one of the most anticipated in Silverthorne. Commentary. Look at that advertisement for luxury living right underneath the article. What about workforce housing? Part of the reason that we don't hear about a lot of this stuff is because of who advertises.
What do you think?
Everybody that has watched the development go up over the last year and a half has also been wondering, when's it going to be available? The town will host a public information session with its former partner on the project, Gorman and Company, a developer whose other summit projects include Wintergreen Apartments in Keystone and Alta Verde in Breckenridge. The session will happen prior to applications rolling out. The rental apartments are just one aspect of the Smith Ranch neighborhood at large, which will also consist of an additional 50 single-family houses, 68 duplexes, and 96 townhomes, all that are for sale and deed restricted. Land was also preserved for the development to also include 500,000 square feet of commercial space. The town estimates that around 30,000 square feet will be used for grocery stores and the remaining 20,000 square feet for other retail uses. Highland explains that the rental aspect of development will deliver two different products. One building will be slowly low-income housing tax credit units, which is a federal program that subsidizes the creation, acquisition, and rehabilitation of housing geared towards low-income households. Highland said that Silverthorne is taking advantage. Highland says because Silverthorne is taking advantage of the low-income housing tax credit program for this building, the income cap associated with the rent control cannot be above 60% of area median income. That's how you do it. The remainder of units will be income capped from 80 to 120%. Tension simmer as Colorado lawmakers gavel into second property tax special session. Democrats' special district reps bristle at a deal they feel left out from making. The Colorado legislature is gaveling in Monday for its second special session in a year, aimed specifically at stopping rising property tax bills. Already, lawmakers in special districts are publicly blasting the process. Supporters of the session hope that a 3-day dash will lead to two seismic property tax measures being yanked from November's ballot, and an end, or at least a reprieve, from the political battles over the policy that have raged since voters axed the Gallagher Amendment in 2020. Others, including representatives of impacted special districts and several lawmakers in the Democratic majority, express skepticism and frustration about another backroom property tax deal that they're now tasked with supporting, involving unelected interests and deeper cuts to local governments and services on top of those already bearing down. They're expecting us to be rubber stamps. At least that's the sense we're getting, Representative Stephen Woodrow, a Denver Democrat, said after a House Democratic caucus meeting last week. Rather than having engaged in these discussions, we get a brief doom and gloom forecast from the fiscal folks, followed by presentations on bill terms that are nearly indecipherable without more extensive background knowledge. Governor Jared Polis announced the special session on August 15th, calling for lawmakers to pass quote-unquote framework his office helped negotiate that would further reduce property taxes beyond what the legislature adopted in May. Commentary. So Polis mentions that it was his office that negotiated the framework, gathered those backroom cigar-smoking buddies to cut a special deal, and then pretend that we're going to have an honest discussion of it while they jam it down the state legislature. I should just vote it down, teach those people a lesson. They're not having a special session to get money to house our homeless or to lower housing costs. They're having a special session to appease rich property owners who think they're above paying their fair share of taxes. That's what's going on here. All right. Colorado's special session on property taxes may be a bumpy ride. It's increasingly uncertain if the deal Polis struck to cut taxes and prevent a pair of November ballot measures will survive. Many lawmakers aren't happy about being called back to the Capitol to approve a deal they never agreed to. Commentary. Approve a deal they never agreed to. Colorado Governor Jared Polis said that he wanted a special legislative session that begins Monday to bring an end to the state's property tax wars. Commentary. Let's be real here. Polis wants to pay off his rich landowning buddies. And that doesn't end the state's property tax wars. It's just another battle. And in this battle, he's taken the choice about what happens with property taxes away from the voters. Back to the article. But first, lawmakers will get their way in the high-stakes fight. But not registered voters, only those who are rich enough to make large donations to the special group that worked out the details of this. It is increasingly uncertain if the Polis deal, struck to cut taxes and prevent a pair of November ballot measures from upending the state budget, will survive. Many Democratic and Republican lawmakers in the House and Senate aren't happy about being called back to the Capitol to approve a compromise they never agreed to. Some of them plan to introduce bills that would crumble the pact negotiated between Polis and legislative leaders and two conservative political nonprofits. Notice those Some of them plan to introduce bills that would crumble the pact negotiated between Polis, legislative leaders, and two conservative political nonprofits who agreed to pull their ballot initiatives if their demands for tax cuts were met. The deal, hired out in a private commentary. Don't they really mean secret?
You keep a secret.
Earlier this month, among a small group of negotiators that included the governor's budget director, Mark Ferdinando, and Senator Chris Hansen, a Denver Democrat, and State Senator Barbara Kirkmeyer, a Republican from Brighton. Handouts don't help. How a Colorado county reduced homelessness by 86% in 2 years. From 2022 to 2024, Douglas County witnessed a steep drop of homeless people living on the street, from 43 to 6, according to a recent point-in-time count.
Hide the money, y'all.
Commentary.
There's poor people around.
Are those numbers real? Or is this the result of some timely move-along orders? Sounds like encouraging people not to offer compassion community-wide is a low-key move-along order. Honestly, it's a rather cruel way of attacking the poor. Douglas County are pretending that they had actual improvements, when in reality, they were just doing whatever it takes to make the most vulnerable among them feel unwelcome so that they move along. They don't care where they go. They don't care what their status is, just as long as they're not where they can see them. Welcome to a prime example of a sundown town. Let's read some of this article. Amid a homeless crisis plaguing Colorado's most populated city, that's Denver, and likely where a lot of these people wound up in the end, a county just south of Denver claims to have found an effective solution to curbing homelessness in communities. Commentary. Yes, sundown them out of town, and then pretend like you're ending homelessness rather than displacing it to a city that's not yours. In a campaign to mitigate homelessness, Douglas County officials emphasized one simple message. Handouts don't help.
What do you think?
They urge residents, for example, against giving money to homeless people on roadways and sidewalks. From 2022 to 2024, Douglas County witnessed a steep drop in homeless people living on the streets, from 43 to 6. The magic of what's happening here is that the numbers were so small to start with, so we could really nip it in the bud, he told Denver Gazette. Commentary. If the numbers were so small, then maybe you have the resources to help these people meet their needs. rather than scare them out of town saying, "We're not giving you nothing." Oh, gosh, this is awful. For months, bulldozers have been digging up in the ground around the old Denver Post printing plant in Goveville. That's the massive rectangular building just west of I-25 and south of I-70, covered in graffiti. Soon the area will be known as Fox Park, a neighborhood in the works of a former Superfund site between Sunnyside and Globeville. While the printing plant's been shuttered for years, the building's become what may be local street artists' best unsanctioned canvas, and the 41 acres around the plant dubbed Fox Park Island because of how poorly connected it is to the rest of the city. Developers, despite being so eager to gobble up acreage and turn it into housing elsewhere in Denver, steered clear of Fox Island for years, even as more than 500,000 drivers a day pass the site. Why? The land's been a toxic dump. It was once the site of Argo smelter from an era when Denver processed heavy metals. The land was declared a Superfund site, a hazardous place, by the Environmental Protection Agency in 1999. Over the years, neighborhoods in Globeville have suffered from cancer. The neighborhood's still considered one of the most polluted in the country. While much of Denver boomed, Globeville has been a home for working-class families with deep roots in the area. The soil's toxicity has staved off most development and served as a deadly buffer to gentrification. On Wednesday morning, developers, federal and city politicians, architects, and others gathered at the site to celebrate the end of a massive environmental cleanup that will now allow the development to come. All right, here's some of the stuff that's coming. A World Trade Center will bring offices, retail, restaurants, and more. And that's just a taste of what the $4 billion investment will bring. Denver needs housing, and the project will provide that. 3,469 units, including hundreds that will be designated as affordable. The city will get a new Virgin Hotel, and Mayor Mike Johnson expects Sir Richard Branson will fly through town to celebrate. Anschutz Entertainment Group, a dominant live music promoter in Denver, will be opening the 2,500-seat venue on the site. There will be 24,000 square foot grocery store, a much-needed institution in a food desert. And it goes on. Let's back up a little bit. Notice the things that aren't said in the housing numbers. First, they haven't declared how many hundreds of houses will be quote-unquote affordable. Will it be 200, 300, 900? Even if it's 900 units of affordable, that means 3/4 of the 3,500 units are going to be market rate and aka luxury. That means 3/4 of the 3,500 units are going to be market rate, also known as luxury, in a city that needs affordable housing like nobody's business. You would think reporters would get wise and challenge statements like that right away. Ask for more clarification. Call their bluff. Hint, we see them not being straight with us and hold them accountable. Pricing algorithms like real pay. They're just going to wind up making these things more expensive than what they're letting on right now. This is why in the planning phase, we don't have affordable housing as an add-on. It should be the primary focus of these kinds of developments. Denver would be much better suited if this project was developed with 75% of the units being at 60% AMI or better. And then they could have fancy stuff on top of that. This is a working family neighborhood. All this stuff needs to be 60% AMI and below. Anything above is just going to price everybody who currently lives there out of the market.
Fun? You call that fun? That was boring.
Motel sues Greenwood Village over ability to rent rooms to homeless people with disabilities. Federal lawsuit claims that city's 29-day limit on hotel stays violates the American with Disabilities Act. Commentary. Wonder if those people are from Douglas County. So this is Greenwood Village wanting to keep poor people as far away from them as they possibly can. This is just another city between Denver and Douglas County, exercising another form of sundowning. They're also a very wealthy community. Imagine that. Wealthy people trying to push poor people out of town and out of sight. But in this case, the people who actually want to help those in need are fighting back. Jasmine Webster needs just a little more time. Time to find a new job. Time to find a new school for her children. Time to find a place to live she can call her own. She's been living at a Motel 6 in Greenwood Village for a month. Her husband and son in one room, and she and her 3 daughters in another, after being evicted from an apartment in Aurora less than a year ago. See how sundown works? They get forced out of one area for not being able to afford rent, and then when they get help in a different area, that municipality tries to drive them out. What's worse, the Greenwood Village City Council this month did away with a long-time exception to its hotel stay limit for families in crisis who are receiving housing assistance from a governmental or charitable entity. Neza Barasha, whose husband owns the Motel 6 at 9201 East Arapahoe Road, said Greenwood Village has shown little patience towards the hundreds of families, many with disabilities, that she has provided temporary refuge for over the last few years. The city, she said, has targeted the motel with extra police patrols while allowing guests at other Greenwood Village hotels to stay more than 29 days at the time regularly. Neza Bakhrah. Let's see if I can pronounce this name. Neza Bakhrah, whose husband owns the Motel 6 at 9201 East Arapahoe Road, said Greenwood Village has shown little patience towards the hundreds of families, many with disabilities, that she has provided temporary refuge for over the last few years. The city, she said, has targeted the motel with extra police patrols, while allowing guests at other Greenwood Village hotels to stay more than 29 days at a time regularly. It has led Bakra, who along with her hotel duties is a licensed psychiatrist, to a singular conclusion. They don't want this group of people in Greenwood Village. People who are unhoused with mental health troubles and those who are in recovery, she said. It is a Bahra who has, along with her hotel duties, is a licensed psychiatrist, to a singular conclusion. They don't want this group of people in Greenwood Village. People who are unhoused with mental health problems and those who are in recovery, she said. Earlier this month, Bahra and the County Economic Defense Project sued the city in the U.S. District Court for the District of Colorado, alleging Greenwood Village is violating the Americans with Disabilities Act. They're asking for economic damages and for a judge to strike down the 29-day limit or grant exemptions to people with disabilities. Commentary. There you go. If there aren't any damages that they have to pay, they'll just keep harassing them year in and year out. Hopefully the judge will rule in favor of these folks and charge the city and county of Greenwood Village a hefty fine, which could actually help these people that they're trying to drive out of their city. Differential treatment by a government entity and its agents on the basis of disability cannot be justified by an arbitrary and irrational reason, reads the lawsuit, filed by well-known civil rights attorney David Lane. Defendants have arbitrarily and irrationally applied and enforced the 29-day ordinance on the basis of discrimination against people with mental illness and or addiction issues, which are disabilities as defined by the ADA, end quote. Greenwood Village spokeswoman Megan Copenhaver said the city won't comment on the situation because of the active litigation. The Denver Post reached out to Mayor George Lance and to 2 councilwomen, Libby Hinton Barnacle and Donna Johnson, who represent the district where the Motel 6 is located. They either didn't respond or they said they were unable to comment. And now, back to the property tax discussion. We don't have a lot to add, but we'll read a few lines as this mess went on. Property tax reform bill advances as special session's first day reveals tension. Firefighters urge lawmakers to fight ballot measures outright, but lawmakers argue risk too high. The scope of the Colorado legislature's special session to cut property taxes took clear shape on its first day Monday as lawmakers shot down a slew of ancillary bills but made progress on a marquee ballot deal. Legislative leaders and governors are pushing House Bill 101, a $248 million cut to property taxes statewide that most importantly to them could result in initiatives 50 and 108 being yanked from November's ballot. If passed by voters, those measures, which are backed by conservative and business-oriented groups, would force even deeper cuts into the state's assessment rate, which directly affects local property tax bills, and put in place a strict tax on how much tax revenue can increase each year. Legislative leaders and the governor are pushing House Bill 1001, a $248 million cut to property taxes statewide, and most importantly to them, could result in initiatives 50 and 108 being yanked from November's ballot. If passed by voters, those measures, which are backed by conservative and business-oriented groups, would force even deeper cuts into the state's assessment rate, which directly affects local property tax bills, and put in place a strict cap on how much tax revenue can be increased every year. Commentary. It's possible these bills could fail, but apparently they can't take that risk. They gotta have their tax cut. The bill passed its first hurdle late Monday afternoon, winning approval 8-3 in the House Appropriations Committee, and progressed to a full debate on the House floor. But that debate won't happen until Tuesday, drawing out the special session by at least one more day beyond the 3-day minimum for a bill to become law. That means lawmakers now will meet at least through Thursday. A series of local governments asked the committee to amend the bill, but none more consistently than local fire districts. Firefighters from several districts bristled at the proposal of deeper cuts to property taxes as they already struggle to keep up with higher day-to-day costs and ever-increasing danger of longer fire seasons. Commentary. Year in and year out, the frequency of fires increases and increases. And we're going to cut fire departments? Just because rich landowners refuse to pay their fair share of taxes? And a little more on the property tax proposals first day. Progressive property tax proposals falter on first day of Colorado's special session as ballot measure deals advance. Rejecting the proposals helped to protect a $255 million tax cut deal legislative leaders struck in exchange for conservative groups abandoning a campaign at the ballot to enact even deeper cuts. On the first day of the state's legislature's special session, property taxes on the first day of the state's legislature's special session on property taxes, Colorado lawmakers Monday shut down a series of attempts by progressive Democrats to limit proposed tax breaks for whether wealthier homeowners and steer more tax relief towards the middle class. The move frustrated the party's most liberal lawmakers, who complained that the General Assembly was caving to wealthy interests rather than legislating on behalf of their constituents. Duh! This may have been a very disappointing process, State Representative Emily Sirota, a Denver Democrat, said Monday in the House Appropriations Committee. Rejecting the proposal helped protect a $255 million tax cut deal legislative leaders struck ahead of the session in exchange for conservative groups abandoning a November campaign to enact even deeper cuts on the ballot. Commentary. This whole thing is about rich landowners pulling whatever shenanigans they possibly can in order to get their taxes reduced. They don't want to pay their fair share of taxes. Apparently, they feel they're above it. There's special deals for rich landowners. Well, isn't enough. Here's another one. Political leaders respond by sounding sympathetic to their constituents, but vote with the institutions that fund their political campaigns. Wash, rinse, repeat. Political leaders respond by sounding sympathetic to their constituents, but vote with the institutions that fund their political campaigns. Wash, rinse, repeat. Political leaders respond by sounding sympathetic to their constituents, but vote with the institutions that fund their political campaigns. Wash, rinse, repeat. Measure viewed as potential fix for downtown Denver's doom loop headed to some city voters in November. Mayor Johnson hopes obscure Denver Downtown Development Authority will fuel city's revitalization. An estimated 2,500 Denver residents and qualifying businesses will have an extra ballot question to vote on in November that their neighbors will not. Commentary. So, a $500 million ballot initiative in the form of a bond that will be paid for by the whole city is in the hands of 2,500 Denver residents and qualifying businesses. So it's possible that the qualifying businesses could both have a resident and a business getting a double vote. I mean, I'm not sure how all that works. But rich guy Walter Eisenberg wanted it on the ballot. Kind of wonder how involved he was with the folks trying to lower the property tax rates at the state level. Back to the article. City Council on Monday agreed to put the future of Denver Downtown Development Authority and thus potential funding for more than $500 million in infrastructure and other products in the city's downtown core in the hands of those qualified electors. Mayor Mike Johnson announced his ambitions to greatly expand the little-known taxing authority at a press conference outside Union Station in May. At the time, he described the tsunami of new public investment that expansion could bring as a means to snap downtown out of doom loop of falling commercial activity and rising crime that emerged at the outset of the COVID pandemic. You do realize the pandemic's over now. Maybe just finishing the work on the 16th Street Mall will take care of all of that, rather than an additional $500 million. The city's core is experiencing what is believed to be record levels of office vacancy, according to real estate firm JLL. Commentary. Hey, if businesses don't know how to keep businesses afloat, but the building's still there, that's an option for housing people. Cities for people. Cities are for people and to keep them alive and to make their lives better. Businesses will come and go. The moment you start prioritizing businesses over people, you create a doom loop. What he's really trying to obscure is the fact that this is all about Walter Eisenberg and sprucing up the city all around his businesses, which, like for many businessmen, suffered due to COVID and the crazy construction that's going on the 16th Street Mall. But he can't wait for all that stuff to just happen in its natural time. He has to have a special investment for him and his businesses and his buddies. None of this involves housing. In fact, it'll further gentrify the area, making it more difficult for people to live there. Remember Joe Henry from earlier? Former Brown Palace hotel worker? He basically got sunned down out of the hotel he was working at. Here's an update. Homeless handyman found dead days after sharing his story. Police believe that Joe Henry, a former Brown Palace hotel worker, killed himself days after sharing his story with Westward. Joe Henry, a former Brown Palace handyman who was fired for sleeping in out-of-order rooms while he was homeless and shared his story with the Westward, died from an apparent suicide on Thursday, August 22nd, only 2 weeks after his firing, according to the Lakewood Police Department. Unfortunately, his death is consistent with suicide, Brian Fieck, a Lakewood police detective, says. Messages in his phone indicate that he took being fired from his job very hard and was in a bad mental space. Henry worked in the Brown Palace as a handyman, fixing up everything from air conditioning to loose toilet paper handers. Having spent most of his life in Denver, he considered the Brown Palace an icon and felt like the man of the hour when he got the job, he told Westward. But Henry also felt hopeless after a series of misfortunes set him back into homelessness. "I'm down to nothing now," he told Westward on August 16th. "What else am I going to do? What else am I going to do?" Hope is a powerful thing when it's available to people, even when circumstances are their worst. Remove the hope, tragedy.
They're all sucker punching me, get in line for a wedgie. All I want and all I need is someone who believes in me.
Property tax deal clears key debate in Colorado House as progressives criticize backroom negotiations. Lawmakers push through bill to cut state assessment rate and stop 2 ballot initiatives. Even more on the special property tax section. What a mess that was. Property tax reform bill at the center of the state officials' deal with conservative activists to pull back a pair of ballot initiatives advanced on schedule Tuesday, clearing a key hearing before the full Colorado House of Representatives. The measure now needs a final House vote on Wednesday. Should it clear that, it will then face a marathon of votes in the Senate as lawmakers end to end the special session before Labor Day. House Bill 1001 builds upon years of tweaks to property tax policy in the state following voters' repeal of the residential tax stabilizing Gallagher Amendment in 2020. If it becomes law, fiscal analysts say it will cut the statewide property tax collections by about $254 million on top of the $1.3 billion cut approved by lawmakers last spring. For most property owners, the new reductions would cut less than $100 from their tax bills, though the amount depends on local mill levies and the property's value, among other changes to the tax policy. The true stakes, however, lie in a pair of ballot initiatives that, if passed by voters in November, would force even deeper cuts to property tax collections. The conservative proponent of Initiatives 50 and 108, led by Advance Colorado, have repeatedly declared that they will yank the measures, characterized by opponents as catastrophic and draconian, if the bill becomes law. So far, it has gone through relatively minor changes as lawmakers seek to protect terms of the deal, even as the terms continue to rankle many legislatures. Those who are critical feel they've been called to rubber stamp a preordained outcome. Political leaders respond by sounding sympathetic to their constituents, but vote with institutions that fund their political campaigns. Wash, rinse, repeat. Political leaders respond by sounding sympathetic to their constituents, but vote with institutions that fund their political campaigns. Wash, rinse, repeat. Political leaders respond by sounding sympathetic to their constituents, but vote with the institutions that fund their political campaigns. Wash, rinse, repeat.
Boring.
So what do you think of this special session property tax? You think it'll pass? Colorado lawmakers pass property tax deal that aims to stop November ballot measures. Oh, look at that. It passed. The passage of House Bill 1001, which came despite consternation from some liberal Democrats. Passage of House Bill 1001 which came despite consternation from some liberal Democrats, marks the end of Colorado's 4-day special legislative session. Oh my gosh, it's finally over. Colorado lawmakers on Thursday gave final approval to a property tax deal that will provide small cuts to homeowners and some businesses, while putting new limits on future property tax growth. In exchange, a pair of conservative groups agreed to remove two measures from the November ballot that would have enacted far deeper cuts, jeopardizing public services and private development across the state. Commentary. It was the 5th time in the past 4 years that the General Assembly passed a statewide property tax cut, as lawmakers tried to strike a balance between funding public services like K-12 schools while providing some relief to the state's rising cost of living, which has escalated since the pandemic. The measure, House Bill 1001, passed with bipartisan support during a 4-day special session, even as progressive Democrats objected, likening the bargain to extortion. Once it is signed into law by Governor Gerald Poulos, the bill would cut property taxes owed in 2026 by an estimated $255 million in the deal to prevent a $2.4 billion tax cut initiative 108 from going before the voters. Commentary. The whole point of this was to prevent the general public from voting on these tax measures. They must have thought that those tax cuts would be defeated. So the people who pay for the campaigns of our politicians forced a special session, forced backroom deals, forced the issue in order to get the largest tax cut they could negotiate behind doors. That's the whole deal on this whole thing. Everything else is smoke and mirrors. If you can't see it, the New York Times put out a few articles on things that are causing the high cost of housing. One of the notable things that they did not mention was the class action lawsuit about the price fixing software RealPage. But here is a republication of one of them here in the Denver Post. Get it all set up here. And away we go. Insurance costs could end U.S. affordable housing. Read that a little different. Commentary. This article is actually a distraction. It's from the New York Times, the AKA paper of record, and it's designed to get you thinking about something other than the price-fixing software RealPage, which just had a class action lawsuit filed against it last week. So, they're putting out a bunch of articles that are not going to talk about pricing controls. They're going to talk about everything else. Anything to distract you from how this stuff works. Here we go. Okay. For the poorest Americans, finding an apartment to rent or a home to buy often means tapping into a vast network of nonprofit groups that use public and charitable funds to rehab or build affordable housing. Over the past year, the skyrocketing cost of property insurance has put that network on shaky ground. In Houston, hundreds of apartments once protected from rising rents are being sold off to landlords who can charge the full market rate. In Selma, Alabama, insurance premiums are keeping even heavily subsidized homes out of reach of buyers. In Kingsville, Texas, a planned affordable housing development was scrapped entirely. Costs are rising for homeowners in all types of states like Florida, Texas, and California, and it's been harder to get insurance at all. The industry says bigger, more frequent storms, along with increased home prices and material and labor costs, are forcing them to raise premiums or stop writing policy. Commentary. This isn't a completely fair assessment of rising insurance costs. Insurance companies cover the financial value of the home. As the value increases, so does the cost of the insurance. It's that simple. If you can get control of housing costs, in turn, you will also get control of the cost of insuring those homes, despite what other factors are involved. But those other factors are the ones they focus on, rather than the plain and simple fact that as costs of housing rise, so does the cost of everything else associated around them. That includes insurance. Wealthier homeowners can go without insurance if they can buy a home without a mortgage. Landlords buy a home without a mortgage. Landlords of market rate apartments can raise the rent to adjust to higher costs. Commentary. Or they can raise the rents to match the market created from software that's designed to maximize the rents out as much as possible. 4,000 or so nonprofits and developers aren't allowed to raise rents or selling homes only to buyers with the most constrained budgets. The soaring cost of insurance is an existential threat. Well, that's enough of this distraction. Basically, what they're trying to do is to get you to think about everything except that which really causes the high cost of housing. It's the pricing of it. It's an overinflated market, and they want to get you thinking about anything but the RealPage lawsuit, in which RealPage is being challenged as a mechanism for fixing the pricing out there in real estate land. Boulder moves to dismiss ACLU camping ban lawsuit in wake of SCOTUS decision. Boulder is seeking to dismiss a much-publicized ACLU lawsuit against the city's camping ban in the wake of a recent U.S. Supreme Court decision that upheld city's rights to prohibit unhoused people from sleeping on the streets. The city filed its first motion to dismiss the suit in 2022. Commentary. Because like most cities, they would rather just tell the poor to move along rather than to try to figure out ways to house them and stabilize them. Claiming that instead of criminalizing homelessness, the camping ban regulates a certain conduct, sleeping outside without shelter. Commentary. Isn't that what homeless is? Sleeping outside without shelter? That's the definition of homelessness. Nobody chooses to be homeless. And to make it illegal and criminalize it? Jeez. Back to... That attempt to dismiss the suit failed. Yeah, because it's unconstitutional. And the case moved forward. But in the latest motion to dismiss, attorneys for the city argue that the case should be dismissed based on this summer's City of Grants Pass versus Johnson Supreme Court decision. The court ruled that it was not cruel and unusual punishment for cities to enforce camping bans. Commentary. Well, it's not unusual. Just think of the cruelty that's around the corner for our homeless communities. In Douglas County, they say they don't offer help to people in need, to those who couldn't get help, so those who couldn't get the help they needed left. And they touted it as a success of their numbers going down. In Aurora, they chased and shamed the homeless around the city rather than chasing around an international crime syndicate, which has now grown in power and is a serious nuisance in the community. Greenwood Village, every time somebody tries to help people out, they try to ship them out. And in Denver, they've pushed the homeless out from areas where the resources are concentrated in the central part of the city to places where they're less visible through the use of sweeps. Now, none of these tactics is unusual, but every single one of them is cruel. Housing advocates withdraw Boulder Airport ballot measures. The Airport Neighborhood Campaign announced Tuesday that it has withdrawn its petitions for the two contentious ballot measures for this fall related to Boulder's municipal airport. One of the measures sought to decommission the airport, and the other would have converted the area into a neighborhood with affordable housing. The measures have gained at least some momentum in the support among the community members. The campaign, which includes local housing advocates and community members with concerns about airport noise and lead pollution, circulated petitions this spring that gathered more than the minimum 3,401 signatures required for each matter to be qualified for the ballot. City Council members also voted earlier this month to advance the measures, but when Boulder officials filed the lawsuit against the Federal Aviation Administration late last month, it changed the landscape of the community debate around the airport. But when Boulder officials filed a lawsuit against the Federal Aviation Administration late last month, it changed the landscape of the community debate around the airport. One aim of the lawsuit is to settle once and for all the question of how long the airport must remain open before it could potentially be decommissioned and the land repurposed for other uses. Judge dismisses most of Douglas County's lawsuit against the state board that blocked property tax relief plan. Denver District Court Judge Martin Egelhoff ruled Wednesday that he lacked jurisdiction to consider the claim brought by Douglas County's commissioners. A judge this week dismissed the vast majority of Douglas County's lawsuit against the state board that blocked the county's creative attempt to offer $28 million in property tax breaks to homeowners. Denver District Court Judge Martin Egelhoff ruled Wednesday that he lacks jurisdiction to consider the claim brought by Douglas County's three commissioners, that the commissioners didn't present enough evidence, any ways to prove their allegations. Egelhoff didn't dismiss the county's claim that the State Board of Equalization's decisions should be subject to court review. The court dismissed three of the county's four claims. Douglas County Attorney Jeff Garcia said in a written statement, the county is evaluating the possible grounds for appeal on the three dismissed claims. However, regardless of any appeal, the county is proceeding to litigate its remaining claim. Because this ongoing litigation, the county cannot comment further on this matter. Douglas County's commissioners, acting as the county's Board of Equalization, sued in January, alleging the State Board of Equalizations didn't have the authority to block the tax break and that it didn't follow Colorado's open meeting laws when it did so in December. Douglas County, isn't that where they tell people not to help folks in need for fear that they might hang around? Maybe it's because they'd rather buy votes with tax cuts rather than helping their citizens in need. Just think of how many people they could help by collecting those taxes, all 6 of the homeless people that remained in their community.
Hide the money, y'all. There's poor people around.
And here's the next distraction from the New York Times as published in the Post last week. Why interest rate cuts won't fix the global housing crisis. Let's not talk about pricing. Let's talk about insurance. Let's talk about interest cuts. All right, let's go see what they got here. Tamria Gallagher, 38, buying a home in Anchorage, Alaska would be a step towards financial stability for her growing family. But even with a six-figure household income and stable jobs, she and her husband have struggled to make a purchase. High mortgage rates, limited housing supply, and historically poor affordability have kept buying a home stubbornly out of reach for Gallagher, an economic researcher who's experiencing her third child. 3 or 4 bedroom homes in good school districts are both hard to come by and prohibitively expensive. Makes it hard to feel secure, she said. It affects everything. From Anchorage to Amsterdam, many developed and even emerging economies are confronting a similar problem. Housing supply is failing to meet demand, helping to push home prices to levels that are out of reach, or even for middle-income families. Affordability problems have been exacerbated by high central bank interest rates, which officials across the globe have been using to tackle rapid inflation. Those policy rates trickle through financial markets to elevate mortgage rates, making it even more expensive for borrowers to buy a home and for builders to finance construction for new houses and apartments. Not to mention pricing algorithms that artificially rig the price even higher yet.
Wise guy, huh?
And now, even another article from the New York Times talking about everything but price-fixing scandals as the result of why housing is expensive. Ballooning costs. What Kalamazoo reveals about the nation's housing crisis. Yet another article from the paper of record nationally, the New York Times, to distract people from the real Page lawsuit, claiming again and a third different thing that affects the cost of housing. Price fixing is not the conclusion they want you to naturally come to. They want you to think about everything else.
What do you think?
There's a discussion about inflation. There's this discussion about housing stock. There's a discussion about insurance, but nothing about price fixing. Just another distraction. Here we go. For years, when Michigan politicians talked about the state's housing problem, they were referring to a surplus. Too many rundown houses stripped of value, copper, sitting empty, and blighting neighborhoods. Now the message has flipped in her state. In her State of the State address this year, Governor Gretchen Whitmer lamented that the housing shortage landed one of her biggest applause lines. With the rent is too damn high, and we don't have enough damn housing. So our response is simple. Build, baby, build. Commentary. If you don't build things people can afford, it's not going to affect the cost of housing. It's the price fixing. But let's move on. If you want to know what the high cost for middle income looks like in 2024, spend some time in Michigan. The surplus, the shortage whip saw here. It is a mitten-shaped miniature of what the entire country has gone through. I've been writing about housing and the economy for decades. Commentary, and he'll be damned if he breathes a word about price-fixing schemes out there in the housing market, making things too expensive for everybody. Oh, wait, that's not what he wrote. Instead, the guy whose job it is to deflect from that particular subject writes this. Back to the article. And I've watched the nation's housing market make the journey from boom to bust to deficit. There are lots of reasons this happened, but they center a big one. The late 2000 housing busts, which the country has never fully recovered from. True. Or as Ali Wolf, chief economist at Zanadata and consulting firm, put it, the Great Recession broke the U.S. housing market. Commentary. There's a little bit of truth in that statement, But notice he's avoiding the price fiction, the issue that we're currently trying to address. Also notice he isn't talking about the savings and loan crisis, which was kind of what the housing crisis in 2008 was based on, only on a smaller scale. That's enough of this. Basically, he's just writing another article to get people to not be thinking about the pricing software. All right. Before this guy gets too far gone on this stuff, here's a history lesson. Back in the early 80s, in the days the federal government used to fund housing for poor folks, Reagan cut the budget by 85%, causing modern-day mass homelessness. How did the private market respond? In just a year or two, the private market responded with the savings and loan crisis. Old Silverado stuff. That was a big thing here in Denver. Very large nationwide mortgage scam. Back then, the aftermath resulted in over 1,000 people going to prison for securities fraud. The government took control of thousands and thousands of foreclosed homes and then reintroduced them into the market at a discount rate, providing several people with an option as first-time home buyers to purchase homes below what the current market rate was for housing. Things went very different in the 2008 housing crash. In that one, nobody went to jail. So there were no consequences for the people in the private market that caused the problem. The banks kept control of the housing. And the government subsidized those banks to the tune of $750 billion or something crazy like that. And now the paper of record, through 3 different articles about the high cost of housing, can't acknowledge that there's been a price-fixing scheme going on? Duh. We'll end with this. I hope people who victim blame the homeless read the tragic story of Joe Henry. 3 weeks after he was fired by the Brown Palace, the homeless handyman took his life. Joe Henry, a former Brown Palace handyman, was fired for sleeping in out-of-order rooms while he was homeless, and shared his story with the Westward. Died from an apparent suicide on August 22nd, only 2 weeks after his firing, according to the Lakewood Police Department. Unfortunately, his death is consistent with suicide, says Brian Falk, a Lakewood police detective. Messages in his phone indicate that he took firing from his job very hard and was in a bad mental place. Henry had worked for the Brown Palace as a handyman, fixing up everything from the air conditioning to loose toilet paper holders. Having spent most of his life in Denver, he considered the Brown Palace an icon and felt like the man of the hour when he got the job. He told Westward, but Henry also felt hopeless after a series of misfortunes sent him back out onto the street and into homelessness. Readers share thoughts about about Joe Henry's life and death on the Westward. So here's a few of these. It says Rhett. I hope people who normally victim blame when they see homeless posts on here read and absorb this tragic story. Adds Tom. I feel so sad for this man, an undignified end. I met an elderly homeless man recently who moved here with his wife from Arkansas for adventure. Then the pandemic came. She got sick, and he spent their life savings trying to save her life, to no avail. He's now a homeless man in his 70s, heartbroken and alone. What is the point of living in the richest country in the history of the world if we don't have free health care and sufficient housing for all? Responds Joshua. I was homeless in Denver during the winter. He ain't wrong. Responds Benjamin Wright. I was homeless in Denver for several years. Ooh, not fun. Offers Rachel. They say the older you get, the more conservative you get. But not me. Housing, food, and employment and health care are human rights. Wonders Jennifer. How's he not able to get a place to live if he had a job? I know dishwashers there that make close to $20 an hour. I just saw a job posting recently, and if he was a handyman, he was probably making more than that. Even if he had to get a roommate, he shouldn't have been homeless. Commentary. At about $2,000 a month rent, first and last month's rent, plus damage deposit, that it takes just to get into a place before application fees and background checks. That's about $6,000 cash on hand is what you need to get into an apartment these days. $20 an hour isn't going to secure housing, especially when you need a few $1,000s up front for deposit and first and last month's rent. One of the sad things is that the hotel might have helped him out in a number of ways if he'd have told them what was going on. There are a lot of smart people who work and manage the hotel could have mentored him towards a solution. They might have even allowed him to use one of the rooms in exchange for being an on-call engineer. The fact that people aren't willing to work things out in order to help take care of each other is the crux of the problem. Thank you for watching The Wright Week in Review with your host, Benjamin Wright. That's W-R-I-G-H-T. Homelessness Analysis. The Wright. Reference articles available in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe to get notifications of upcoming in-depth analysis and reports when they become available. Till then, we'll see you next week here at The Wright.